Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the broken McFlurry machine to my McDonald's, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Is that a recycled?
Is it a recycle?
I feel like maybe I've heard that one before.
Oh, well, now I feel bad.
I had such faith in you, Daniel.
Hey,
it was a great streak.
the barrel is getting dry. Hey, if something's funny once, it's definitely worth being funny a second time. But something that will not be recycled is this live stream episode, because we do have a lot of interesting stuff. There's just sort of a lot going on in pop culture this week.
Yeah.
Interesting stories that kind of caught my attention, and I think stories that just spark interesting conversations, which is the point of these live streams, is just to sort of see what's going on. And then as Christians, how can we talk about this? How can we engage with this and critique this and just sort of contribute to the ongoing conversations? So we have J.K. Rowling controversies. We have other movie controversies. We have the point of art. And we do have a host corner that fears me with great fear and trembling. So we'll leave that as a surprise. But encourage you guys, if you guys are watching live or watching us at a later time, jump into the comments section, join the conversation. Let's talk about this stuff. But there is a lot to talk about, so let's kick things off like we always do with cultural conversations. So kind of the first main topic we have today is a story that has been unfolding over the last week, and there's a lot of chewy stuff to get into with this story. And it is a story that I feel like encapsulates so much of
Unfortunately.
unfortunate things that kind of the cultural moment that we're in, and it touches on a lot of different areas. And that is J.K. Rowling being removed from the Museum of Pop Culture. And we don't mean removed as in kindly being asked to step out of the building, but that her very presence within the museum has totally been scrubbed. Any kind of references to her in the Harry Potter exhibits. Apparently those books were now written by a mystery author, unknown, because she is not mentioned anywhere throughout this. So we'll kind of get some of the details, and then we'll, and I think there is some stuff for Christians to unpack with this. But the Museum of Pop Culture is in Seattle. I've seen it. I haven't gone inside of it when I was there. But so this museum kind of took her out, all of her references out from the museum, and kind of explain the decision. There was an official blog was posted on the museum website called "She Who Must Not Be Named," where someone that is works at or with the museum went on a very impassioned explanation, a very long explanation for why, kind of the justification for removing J.K. Rowling as a result of her the stated opinion she has given as far as like trans issues and gender and sexuality, the same things that lots of people have been talking about her over the last year. So she kind of goes on, the author goes on an explanation of this, and there are, it's a fascinating, you could probably teach this, you could probably use this in a class somewhere or seminar, because there is just so much in this article that I think speaks to sort of bigger things. Probably the most, the part that stood out to me is just sort of some of the irony. So we have the article ends, the final words to conclude this, which the author says, of course, the work for diversity, equality, inclusion, and accessibility is a practice. It's why you're seeing more signage in our galleries around harmful language and hateful, abusive, divisive creators. And then she kind of goes on to a little bit. So very much speaking out against harmful hate speech. We got to speak kindly to each other. We need to be respectful.
Which is interesting, because how did this person start the article?
Well, thank you for asking. So the article itself kicks things off with a bit of a bang with these words. It says, there is a certain cold, heartless, joy-sucking entity in the world of Harry Potter, and this time it's not actually a Dementor. And then later, as she gets into it, says, yes, we're talking about J.K. Rowling, and no, we don't like that we're giving her more publicity. So this is the last time you'll see her name in this post. We'll just stick with you-know-who because they're close enough in character. And for those not enlightened with Harry Potter, you-know-who is Voldemort himself, the evil snake-like Dark Lord. So they're making that connection. So apparently they didn't quite get to the importance of respectful language until the end of the post. And they had to get a bit more out of it,
Yeah.
out of their system. But this is a fascinating thing because I think regardless of what you think of J.K. Rowling, or regardless as a Christian what you think of the Harry Potter stories, I think it definitely is notable that a museum, again, this isn't like the Smithsonian, but it is a
No.
big, it's a well-known museum. It's one of the big kind of pop culture, it focuses in on a very important part of like our heritage
Yeah.
as a country and like a culture. So it is notable to like that like, people in the museum that like, preserving the history of pop culture are like self-censoring, editing out things that they that people involved don't find agreeable or don't line up with their own views. What's some of your? I'm assuming I know you well enough to know that you probably have a thought or two on this story, and we want to not step maybe only 1 foot up on the soapbox. But what are some of your thoughts with some of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot could be said about this. I think, like, especially that last paragraph in the article, like, you can just tell that it's written by an insufferable brat. Like, that's the language that, like, an insufferable person uses. And it's rather, I think, sad. And it's also just telling, like, it's not at all about, diversity, equity, inclusion, and inclusivity. Because, on the very same coin, they're likening some person to a dementor or, someone who wouldn't even deign to say their name anymore because they're such a evil person. In which case, like, in fact, J.K. Rowling is not an evil person, and she's never done the things that are always claimed to be done against her. That people always say that she's anti-trans or bigoted, hateful person. All she's done is point out the fact that like women are women, and because of that, she gets like labeled, some sort of hateful person, which I just think it's ridiculous and insane. Unfortunately, it is sort of a great encapsulation of where a lot of people in our culture are today. And I just think this sort of practice of, I think it's maybe the converse of the church today in some ways, because we've talked a lot about like good people making bad art and like how the church likes to hold up people based on their character, not so much on their work. And I think this is sort of the church of the church of culture, if you will, is sort of doing the same thing now. And so they've become way more, I think, religious in their view of what art is and less about the art itself. Because you'll notice they're still showing and using the language of Harry Potter.
Yeah, they're still,
like,
because again, this is a museum, this would be like an art museum that I refuse to, any mention of Michelangelo. Like, you can't tell the story of art without Michelangelo. Like, you can't tell the story of pop culture without J.K. Rowling, who's created one of the biggest pop culture phenomenon, maybe the biggest in like the history of our world. Like, so they sort of have to do it. But like the crazy thing too is like a museum is supposed to, in theory, like encapsulate history. Like this contains history. Like it's not a moral thing. Like
no, like, and they're not judgments or like affirmations of the
like
people
a lot of
that
artists,
they house.
Like a lot of artists are bad people. Like a lot of people in history, like a lot of the, like the founding fathers, like owned slaves. Like, but I've never walked into a museum and being like, I bet this museum supports slavery because it's mentioning a U.S. president. Like, it's like this is history. Like, I think that's part of the discussion is like having that stuff available and like preserving it so that we can dialogue about it. Which this is very much like, not only can you not disagree because that makes you hateful and bad, but like you can't even exist if you don't support this. And I do think another like because one of the things I hear or sort of see all the time is like from like the kind of the Christian side of it is like Christians should never should never like watch a movie or listen to music or something that contains like lyrics or scenes or things of like stuff that we would disagree with or would go against our biblical view. And like, there's valid arguments like for why maybe Christians shouldn't like morally like some of that, but one of the things that always jumps out to me is like, you know, don't support people that hate you. You know, that gets used in like a lot of like marketing and stuff too. Like, you know, support us. Don't keep giving your money to like these creators and these institutions that hate you. And in some ways, I feel like it's doing the same thing. Like it's very much like, I think, hey, some of these people probably do hate us. You know, there are some hateful people out there, but like, is disagreement, like is a creator that like is like a non-Christian that makes a movie that doesn't endorse biblical stuff. Like, does that mean they hate me as a Christian viewer, or does that mean that like, hey, we don't agree, and like they have the right to tell their story, I have the right to disagree with it, or even not watch it or listen to it, but like, just we've simplified the discussion so much to where like disagreement is hatred, and like because it's hatred, like we just need to like, you know, make them go away, rather than now we can talk about, now it's a conversation. Like,
yeah, well, I just think the art of conversation is like rapidly disappearing from like our collective consciousness, it seems, because, you know, disagreement is hate and words are violence, and it's like, well, at this point, like, what's the point of going on, you know? And so it's like why even bother if you're just gonna try and control the conversation and shut people down? One, not even being honest about their opinion, but completely conflating, you know, what they said with, you know, some worst aspect of what you imagined there is their real intention. And I think that's really the sort of the more sinister side of a lot of this, is it's like you know, you sort of inflate what they say and make it fit your narrative so that you can then be you know, morally justified in, you know, not even hearing from that person anymore. And I think that is the opposite of progress, of liberalism, of truth finding, of I think anything that a good and decent person,
because like clearly it's not just about like respect and love, because like
no,
the blog itself is very much like, it's about power and control and like enforcing your own orthodoxy. And kind of my two takeaways, I guess, and then we can move on, is just like, one, Christians should be very aware of the fact that like, you know, in real time history in a sense is like being edited and like enforced and like rewritten. And like obviously this is like an isolated incident, but like we've talked about similar stuff here on the Collision. Like it's not, it is a trend. There is a lot of that, of like, you know, of sort of trying to work backwards and like correct the sins of the past rather than a willingness to talk about it. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. And the second one would just be, as Christians, to make sure that like we aren't doing similar things as far as just, hey, if you disagree with us, you know what we believe as Christians, like then you hate us and you need to go away and we need to boycott you. And like I feel like if we're mad at this, we should at least also be aware that like let's not do the same thing when like, the shoe's on the other foot, of like, you know, let's enforce our orthodoxy because they're doing it first, because that's not healthy. But hey, if you guys are watching live or listening later, let us know your thoughts on this. If you've been following the story, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, kind of what are your takeaways as a Christian? What do we do with stuff like this? And maybe have you seen other examples of sort of this like censoring in real time? But for our next segment, something that I kind of wish, probably in hindsight, that I could censor and remove in real time, because our next segment is Host Corner.
Hello viewers, I thought for today we would do something a little bit different. As you can see, I'm not in the studio, I'm in my home, and more precisely, my kitchen. We often talk here at The Collision about culture, about making culture, but what does that actually mean? And so I thought for today we would look at making bread, and just this simple act of making something, producing something, rather than just merely being consumers. And so for me, that's often just maybe the baseline of what it means to be making culture. You don't have to be Van Gogh, you don't have to be Charles Dickens or Johnny Cash to make a simple loaf of bread. And so I thought today I would walk you through how to do that. I've been making this for a number of years now, and it's quite simple. You need a bowl, you need a scale, 430 grams of flour, teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of yeast, 325 grams of water. Now we'll mix all this up and cover it and let it sit and set it someplace warm. I usually put it on top of the fridge. Lightly flour a surface and just scoop that dough right out of there. I like to kind of give it a little bit of shape to make it into a bit of a loaf. So once you're done with that, again, it doesn't take long, a little bit of flour. Cover that, we'll let it sit for 30 minutes. While that is proofing, we will throw this glass loaf pan in the preheated oven for 450 degrees. So at this point, your oven is preheated. Again, I'll dust it a little bit with some flour. Just kind of scoop that up. Drop it right in the pan. Cover that with some foil. We'll pop that in for a total cooking time of 45 minutes. 30 minutes with the foil on and 15 minutes with it off. You get a beautiful homemade loaf of bread. And Daniel can make fun of me all he wants, but it's incredibly satisfying to be able to make your own bread at home, and not just satisfying, it's also better than anything you could buy in the store.
Indeed, I can make fun of you all day long. That was profound. I feel moved.
Thank you. Thank you.
I feel inspired.
Well, it's not the reaction I was expecting, but yeah.
I will say, as someone that has tasted that bread,
I was gonna say
I have a little bit more grace to allow that. The most amusing part about that is that Sam informed me that there is a director's cut out there. There is like a
that was 2.5 minutes, and I was doing my best to try and get it down to a minute, but I couldn't quite do it. I'm not, I think if I had a lot of takes and more camera angles, and I wasn't doing it, between nap times and stuff with the kids, then I could probably get it down to a minute. But I think the original cut was maybe like 6 minutes, so I had to just trim a lot of the fat, and that's what you have.
Yeah, hey, some would say that you didn't trim all the fat, but that was definitely a host corner say. Let us know if you guys will be trying out Sam's homemade bread, if you will be inspired to go create culture.
And we can make it a series. Like, we can make other stuff. Like, just let me know. I mean, if you want to more recipes, maybe some wood carving.
Jesus, come quickly, please, before this world comes to an end. But something that's a little more chewy, tender than Sam's bread is our next story, next kind of newsy story that's been still unfolding. And this is sort of, you may have seen some of this if you follow pop culture, related to the movie Blindside. I forget how many years ago this movie came out, of a successful movie, won Sandra Bullock an Oscar. So it got a lot of buzz about kind of based on a real story of adopting a football player and raising him, and he had success, and sort of one of those heartwarming stories. Well, now that heartwarming story is being reevaluated. So just, I think, maybe 2 days ago, yesterday or 2 days ago, the subject of that film has kind of had raised some accusations, kind of legal action towards the family that supposedly adopted him, as the movie presented it, and kind of challenged the narrative, saying like, hey, the movie might make you feel good, but like, the real story wasn't the same. Like, I was never adopted. It was only a conservatorship, and like, I felt tricked. I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't make money from the movie. And this family kind of, it made them look good, and they made a bunch of money at my expense. So that kind of was a big bombshell story that dropped. And since then, like, the family itself has responded to that and being like, hey, that's just not true. Like, there was always very open about that, and that they in fact did not make the money that it said that they made on his behalf, and that it was split evenly, and that they weren't doing it for the money, and that they love him, that there'd been some estrangement. And so it is very much like a he said, she said kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can get into the, I don't want to plant my flag with like,
Yeah.
obviously this side's right, obviously this side's right. We don't know. That's the role of court or whatever happens with this story. But I did think it was an interesting story because it kind of piggybacked on a story that I already was thinking we could maybe talk about. And that's
Yeah.
just sort of these like based on a true story movies. Because another kind of recent controversy that happened last week, the movie Gran Turismo, which is sort of a new video game racing movie that comes out, I think it comes out next week, although we have a review up on our channel if you're interested in checking that out. And without like spoiling really, plot points of the movie, sort of from the early screens of this, there's been some controversy that claiming that like, although the events that happen in the film are true to life, they've been kind of rearranged, recontextualized, and particularly there's a kind of a tragedy, a tragic real life moment that the movie addresses, but in a different, they frame it very different from how it happened. They make it earlier in the story and kind of use that as like a motivational thing in the story to like, get back in the saddle. You can do this, and kind of make it this like heartwarming thing when the reality of the story is very much that it didn't play out that way. So I thought we could kind of get into that a bit, because that is, because even like last year with The Woman King, this was sort of a discussion of like how, and even Sound of Freedom has had some of this conversation, like these sort of based on a true stories, like how accurate do they need to be? Like, what is the role of creative license? Like, what's the danger, if there is any, of sort of rearranging, playing fast and loose? Like, can we still be inspired by these stories and these events if they're not necessarily like a documentary realistic? What are your some of your
I
thoughts?
mean, I think like I think at the bottom you need to realize that like these are entertainment pieces, and so I think if that's your baseline, sort of work up from there. And I think the problem is maybe the pushback to that, just hey, it's just entertainment, like relax, would be, well, oftentimes it's the entertainment that sort of gets into the psyche of sort of the mass populace, and so people then will sort of take as gospel something that was seen in a film, because most people aren't necessarily going to go in and look up, hey, how accurate was, Gran Turismo, and like, that was so great that he had that comeback after the big crash, and it's like, oh, wait a second, that's not how it happened. And so I think, the danger maybe, or the pushback on kind of playing fast and loose with like timelines or, characters in a story that were based on a true story would just be, it may twist some of the narrative around that person or that true story to be, sort of accepted truth when it's in fact not at all. And I think I think that's not a new phenomenon. I think throughout history, accepted truths have been passed down through lore or just tall tales, and it's like, oh, actually, no, that person wasn't like that at all. Like, even things like, Napoleon, I don't think was actually necessarily all that much shorter than everybody else. Like, it's just for whatever reason, like Napoleon is kind of seen as this short, short guy who was, always trying to like make up for the fact that he was short, but it's like, well, he was probably average. And so I don't know. I think a lot of it is just, I don't know, having some discernment when it comes to movies telling stories based on a true story. And so I think, I don't know. I think the reason the Gran Turismo one maybe touches a chord is because, like, the people it's telling the story about are still living. And so, like, I think if this was telling a true story that was like 100 years ago, I don't know that many people would raise a fuss about it.
Yeah, because I do think there's two distinct aspects of this conversation. Like, one is just the people involved, like with this Blindside controversy, like whatever, if it does turn out that this guy was taken advantage of and like was misled and like, people profited at his expense, like there's moral implications to that, and like Christians should be People should be, all people should be bothered by that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And like, if it turns out the other way, that it's this guy is trying to take advantage now because he's angry at the people that raised him, and that he's misinterpreting the facts, like that's also a moral thing, and people should care about that. And like you said, at the Gran Turismo, like the people involved, like, so that is a relevant part. Kind of the other part of that is just sort of the nature of stories. Like,
Yeah.
does it, like for the Woman King movie, like, personally, like, I've never been overly, like, I usually don't even address it very much in the reviews. Like, I didn't mention the Gran Turismo thing because like, I don't necessarily go to these movies expecting like a documentary. Like,
Yeah.
I know, like, based on a true story, can do some heavy lifting for, like.
It's like the guy's name.
Yeah, there was
is
a guy
true.
who he
There was
had
a guy in a race car.
at some
That
point,
much we know. Like,
it's like, I think there is, like, these are supposed to be, the whole point of based on is that we're telling a story and it has some kind of grounding. Like, it was inspired by something.
yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily
I think
mean
maybe
that we're
inspired by true events.
yeah. It's like
is
we're not
sort of
necessarily like
the
beholden to like
better.
give people a very accurate historical. Like,
Yeah.
we're trying to tell human stories and like do more with like bigger themes and stuff. Make it entertaining, and like, so that's, I don't know. Like, I think for me, some of the outrage about these sort of things, I think is just a misunderstanding of like what are stories for. Like, our stories, our fictional sort of like movies supposed to be just like our source of information for like historical fact, or is it, hey, this is to inspire you, and here's like a real life story that was inspirational, and we'll kind of play around with it and make it work.
Yeah. Do you think some of this maybe more of the Gran Turismo one is? Do you think some of this is more a reflection of our new sort of puritanical culture, like our obsession with orthodoxy, like whatever orthodoxy it is, whether it's in the church or like the Church of Hollywood or whatever you want to call it? Like, I feel like there is a real need for people to like, yeah, but that's not how it happened. Like, it was this way, and like, oh, but this person doesn't believe the right things, and so that's why we have to, remove their name from the books they wrote. Or
Well, I think even
like I don't know. Like,
I
do you think
that
some of that is
connected with like just this sort of obsession of being unhappy, like
Yeah.
of not being able
Yeah.
to enjoy things that like, hey, this sounds good, it's inspirational, but like surely there's a skeleton in the closet somewhere
Yeah.
if we dig, like,
I bet that's not the whole story.
yeah, I think there is very much like a cynicism when it comes to
Yeah.
culture that like, because like Sound of Freedom was the same way, where it's like, this is a story that has a very powerful message that people can agree on, and like, and the same discussion is happening as
Yeah.
far as like, well, like, are the stories that is, even the stories that it's based on, like, were those kind of fabricated and like added a little bit? Like, did he really do the things that he said? And then is the movie reflecting the fabrications? Like,
It's like,
there
no,
is-
it's a movie.
like there is some of that, and I think
Yeah.
not that that's not a discussion. Like, I think people should talk about that. Like, people should dialogue about, like, hey, if it's based on a true story, like, I'm always curious, like, how true of
Yeah.
a story. It's just that I think we can still be inspired by like a message of something, regardless of whether, like, if it was a totally fictional story,
Yeah.
no one would have a problem. People would be like, oh, that's powerful that he did that. Like,
Yeah.
I think we can still treat stories that way without necessarily being like, well, I can't be inspired to fight sex trafficking until I know, without a shadow of a doubt, that every detail of this is accurate
Yeah.
to life. Like, I think that kind of misses the point of like what creative license
Well,
is.
because it is like, it's by necessity a condensation of the true story as well. So it's like you just can't fit the whole story in a 2-hour runtime, and so you're gonna have to cut out stuff or rearrange some things, because just like you're not making a week-long movie.
But
It's like, come on, like
I do think you're right though, as far as like it does matter. Like, it does shape. Like, I know what's his name, Bill Mayer. He did a review that everyone dumped on of the Barbie movie. But like, one of his complaints about it is similar, saying like the movie's set in like this year. Like, it's a contemporary. Like, it's not the timeline of the Barbie movie. Like, and in the movie, like, the whole board of Mattel is like 12 dudes. Like, it's all male. where he's like in reality, like I think it's like there's like 6 guys and 4 girls, or like 4 women. Like it's not entirely even, but I guess basically, and his sort of thing is like it presents this mindset that like clearly, you know, it's pushing sort of the patriarchy kind of, you know, isn't that shocking that Barbie has like, you know, the company that made Barbie is all dudes, and like it's like, well, like, but like it's not, like the movie shows that because it's trying to tell a more thematic thing rather than like, you know, they weren't checking to see what the actual people on the board was today.
Right.
So I do think that we should still be, even if I don't think it's as big of a, like, I think we can enjoy stories without being like cynical. I do think it matters that we also are at least aware of the fact that not everything that's presented as true is that we can just take that as like, well, therefore I saw it in the movie that this happened, you know, therefore this is true. But hey, let us know what you guys think, if you guys, how you kind of approach these types of movies. If you're one that is bothered by you know, the creative liberties, a creative license that is taken with some of these historical stories, if that is something that you feel like you can't support, or if you are able to sort of separate them, or even if you've seen a movie and if that has kind of sent you on the path to do some research and to actually learn more than you would have had you never seen the movie in the first place, we'd love to have a conversation with you about that. As far as this show, I think we'll forego our third topic. Just because I think there's a lot to get into with sort of Sweeney and some comments in an interview about what the point of art is, and I don't think we have enough time in this episode to solve the age-old question of what is the point of art.
So I think what is art?
What is art? And we need more. We need an episode that's less filled with bread making to really dig into our teeth into that story. So we'll do that. But kind of final thoughts here at the collision. Kurji, there's. We're sort of out of the like the prime movie season. We're very much in the movie season where like review embargoes don't lift until the day the movie comes out. Like not a whole lot of big things for the next month or so, but there is some interesting movies that are coming out. I think we should have a review for Blue Beetle this week or early next week, depending on my schedule. The Hill, kind of a new faith-based film with Dennis Quaid. We'll have a review drop for that next week as well.
Wasn't he in that Wing and a Prayer?
Yeah, so he's been making the faith film circuit, which I've actually started. I have a screener for that one, so I'm
his career must be going well then.
Yeah, hey, maybe it could very well be good motives. And then also the Gran Turismo, the movie I think also comes out officially next week, but we have a review. I thought it was a really good movie. Historical accuracy notwithstanding. So encourage you guys, if you're interested, it is a feel-good sports movie. So check out that review. Any kind of final thoughts for you?
Well, I think speaking of like based on a true story, I haven't seen the movie Oppenheimer yet, but it did inspire me to get the book that the movie, I think a lot of the movie was based on, which is American Prometheus. So I'm reading that now, and so I think there can be, if there are great books that align or that was the source material for some of the movies, it can be a good thing, because I'm now reading about the man, the myth, the legend. From more of a historical perspective and not a Hollywoodized version of that.
Although that Hollywoodized version is pretty good as well. But thanks for watching, guys. Always appreciate you guys joining us for these live streams. If you're watching us later, listening to us on the audio podcast, don't be shy. You can still throw some comments and questions in. We can have a conversation about this throughout the week. Hope you'll join us next week, every Thursday at noon. There's always stuff to talk about, so hope you'll join us there. And if you haven't done so, could you guys subscribe to our channel, podcast, all the things you know to do. Most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.